I paused the recording, staring through the crystalline observation dome at the most expensive piece of military hardware in the known galaxy. The Mark VI combat simulator gleamed beneath me, its quantum processors humming with enough power to run a small star system. Being the head instructor at the Galactic Defense Academy had its perks, and one of them was watching the endless parade of overconfident senior cadets march into that chamber, absolutely certain they would be the ones to finally beat the unbeatable simulation. Resume recording. I clicked my mandibles in amusement. Another batch of senior cadets will attempt the Decadian challenge tomorrow. As always, I have prepared the standard medical teams and psychological support staff for the inevitable failures. The simulation chamber below me had crushed the spirits of the galaxy's finest military minds for the past 30 years. The challenge was deceptively simple: complete a simulated decade-long interstellar conflict in under 12 hours of real time. The program adapted to every strategy ever attempted, learning and evolving with each failure. We had seen everything from the methodical Arxian battle lattices to the infamous psychic swarms of the Volden Collective. None had even made it past the 5-year mark. Personal notation, I added, watching the maintenance drones polish the neural interface pods. The betting pool among faculty has reached record heights this year. Professor Nax is so confident in his prize student's failure that he has wagered 3 months' salary. Then again, he's won that same bet for the past 12 years straight. I flicked through the historical data on my neural display. The record for fastest failure belonged to a particularly arrogant Xylaxian prince who managed to get his entire simulated fleet destroyed in under 6 minutes. He insisted a solar flare had interfered with his neural connection. We all pretended to believe him. The longest attempt came from a mechanoid collective consciousness that spent 11 hours meticulously calculating every possible move before its processors overheated. Additional note: the maintenance team reports that they've fully repaired the damage from last week's incident. Cadet Vix Tal's tentacles have almost completely grown back, and she has withdrawn her formal complaint about the simulation's excessive realism. I chuckled, remembering how the young Cephalon had literally tied herself in knots trying to coordinate a 4-fronted offensive. The neural feedback had been apparently quite intense. Final notation for today's log. The Academy Board has approved 3 last-minute transfer students for tomorrow's attempt. I felt my secondary heart skip a beat as I read the species designation. Terrans. Humans. The board has finally lost what little sense they had left. They're letting Deathworlders attempt the Decadian challenge. The words felt wrong even as I spoke them. Humans in the simulator? The same species that still used chemical propulsion for their planetary vehicles because they enjoyed the rush, the ones who invented something called parkour because normal locomotion was too boring. Note to self: increase medical staff by 200%. Review the simulator's safety protocols. And I glanced at the wagering terminal blinking on my desk. Place a significant bet on total system failure within the first hour. With their reputation for chaos, the humans would probably find some way to make the simulator achieve sentience and declare war on the faculty. At least that would be more interesting than watching another textbook attempt at perfect military doctrine fail spectacularly. End log. I shut down the recording and settled in for one final system check. Tomorrow would either be the most embarrassing day in these cadets' lives or, no, that was definitely what it would be. Some constants in the universe never changed. If only I knew then just how wrong I was. The following morning, I stood at the observation deck, watching the most bizarre military formation I'd ever witnessed in my 300 years of service. The 3 human cadets weren't marching, they were practically bouncing down the corridor, engaged in what they called trash talk. 10 credits says I can crash more ships than both of you combined, announced Marcus Rodriguez, a tall human with a perpetual grin that made my security training scream danger. His official file had noted Havoc as his call sign, with an attached incident report about something involving a training shuttle, 3 rubber bands, and a cafeteria tray. The details were classified. Please. Nova Blake rolled her eyes, casually tossing a data cube between her hands like a toy. Quality over quantity. I'm going for style points. She had the highest tactical scores in Earth's Academy, though her methods were described as unconventional. And technically not violations since we never explicitly made rules against that. The 3rd human, Raj Patel, wasn't even paying attention to them. His focus was entirely on a primitive handheld gaming device. His nickname Wildcard came from an incident where he rewrote an entire combat AI during a lunch break because he was, in his words, bored. The other alien cadets pressed themselves against the walls as the humans passed, their various appendages trembling. A young Arxian actually molted on the spot, a clear sign of stress in their species. Professor Nax's prize student, Xenix Prime, watched from a safe distance, all 7 of his eyes narrowed in calculated disdain. Admiral, my assistant, chirped nervously. Shouldn't we review the safety protocols one more time? We reviewed them 6 times already, I sighed, mandibles clicking in frustration. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? The moment those words left my mouth, I heard Rodriguez say, "Hey, what happens if we reverse the polarity on the quantum stabilizers?" "Absolutely not," I barked into the intercom. All 3 humans looked up at the observation deck and smiled. Those smiles sent shivers down all 4 of my spinal columns. "Just kidding," Admiral Rodriguez called back. "Totally kidding," he winked. I didn't know humans could wink. I didn't like that they could wink. Remember, I announced to all assembled cadets, this simulation represents a decade of warfare. The neural interface will make it feel like 10 years of command decisions compressed into 12 hours. Many great leaders have broken under the strain. 10 years in 12 hours, Patel finally looked up from his game. "Cool, that's like a speed run." What I asked, immediately regretting it. "Don't worry about it," Blake grinned. "Just make sure you're recording everything. This is going to be fun." As they stepped into their neural pods, I couldn't shake the feeling that I should have called in sick today. Very, very sick. The pre-simulation briefing room buzzed with anticipation and, in the case of several methane-breathing species, actual buzzing. I stood at the podium, explaining the simulation's parameters for what felt like the 1,000th time. The Decadian challenge simulates a full-scale galactic conflict, I gestured to the holographic display. You'll command fleets, manage resources, conduct diplomacy, and coordinate with AI-driven allies across 12,000 star systems. Every decision ripples through a decade of simulated time. The interface will feed you 10 years of sensory data and strategic information in 12 real-time hours. The human cadets weren't taking notes like the others. Rodriguez was building what appeared to be a house of cards using his information tablets. Blake had her feet up on the desk, drinking something called energy drink that my scanners insisted was mildly toxic. Patel was. Was he actually taking a nap? "Cadet Patel," I snapped. He jolted awake. "Sorry, sir. Just power napping. Used to pull all-nighters gaming. Best to start fresh," he grinned, then immediately went back to sleep. The nearby Volden students scooted their hover chair away from him, all 12 eyes blinking in confusion. Meanwhile, the betting pools had reached astronomical levels. The faculty lounge's quantum display showed the odds against human success at 10,000 to 1. Professor Nax had mortgaged his vacation home on 3 moons to increase his wager. Even the cafeteria staff were getting in on the action, betting their best synthetic protein rations. "Each cadet team will operate independently," I continued, watching Xenix Prime's smug expression. The Arxian had spent 3 years preparing for this challenge. His team had memorized every major battle in galactic history, calculated optimal fleet formations down to the individual fighter, and developed contingency plans for their contingency plans. "Hey, Nova," Rodriguez whispered loudly, still stacking cards. "Remember that time we won the Academy's tactics tournament by spamming corvettes?" "Good time," she replied, crushing her empty can against her forehead, a gesture that made several crystalline beings crack in horror. "Think that'll work here?" "Please maintain simulation protocol," I growled. "This is not one of your video games." "Everything's a game if you're having fun," Patel mumbled in his sleep. I decided to ignore that disturbing statement. Xenix Prime raised 3 of his appendages. "Admiral, I must protest. The humans aren't taking this seriously. This simulation represents the pinnacle of military education." Dude, Rodriguez's card tower now defied several laws of physics. "You really need to relax." "Hey, want to make a side bet? First one to blow up a sun buys drinks." The Archean's exoskeleton turned pale. That's not even a valid strategy. Admiral, please note my formal protest. Their presence here mocks our sacred traditions. I was inclined to agree, but rules were rules. Even if those rules had never anticipated humans attending the academy. Speaking of which, what are they doing now? My assistant whispered in horror. The three humans had pushed their desks together and were eating? Before a major neural interface simulation, Blake was passing out packets of sour gummy worms while Rodriguez distributed something called Doritos. Patel had finally woken up and was chugging a beverage that my sensors refused to even analyze. Breakfast of champions, Blake explained to a horrified mechanoid observer. Sugar rush plus caffeine equals better reaction time. Your species willingly consumes nerve toxins for enhanced performance. The mechanoid's logic circuits audibly whined. Ever tried Mountain Dew? Patel offered his drink. The mechanoid backed away so quickly it dented the wall. Final preparations. Everyone, I announced, desperate to maintain some sense of dignity. Report to your pods in 15 minutes. Remember, this simulation has never been completed. The current record for survival is 4 years, 6 months of simulated time. Quick question. Rodriguez raised his hand, orange dust coating his fingers. Is there a speedrun category for this thing? Like a leaderboard? What I asked for the second time that day. Never mind, he grinned. We'll make our own. I suddenly wished I'd placed an even larger bet against them. Though watching them now, I wasn't entirely sure which outcome I was more afraid of, their failure or their success. Simulation commencing in 3, 2, 1. The neural interface pods hummed to life, and I settled into my observation chair, ready for another predictable display of failed military doctrine. The viewing screens surrounding me showed each team's starting position in the simulated galaxy. Xenix Prime's team immediately began implementing their meticulously planned opening moves. Fleets arranged in perfect geometric patterns, resource chains optimized to 6 decimal places, diplomatic messages crafted with textbook precision. Then there were the humans. Are they playing rock, paper, scissors to decide their first move? Professor Nax sputtered, spilling his nutrient shake. Indeed, the humans had spawned their consciousness into a virtual meeting room and were using the childish hand game to determine strategy. Rodriguez won, pumping his fist in victory. Time to speedrun this bad boy. His voice crackled through our monitors. Raj, you're on chaos duty. Nova, do the thing. What thing? I demanded, but they were already moving. The next few minutes defied every principle of military strategy I'd ever learned. While Xenix's team carefully fortified their starting sector, Rodriguez ordered every civilian transport in their territory to ram into their own space docks at full speed. What are they doing? My assistant shrieked. They're destroying their own infrastructure. Nah, Rodriguez's avatar grinned. We're just redistributing assets. The resulting explosions created a debris field that their military ships immediately started using as cover. Meanwhile, Blake had somehow figured out how to manipulate the simulation's physics engine by having ships fire in opposite directions, creating makeshift propulsion systems that shouldn't have been possible. Their breaking formation. Professor Nax was practically dancing. This will be over in minutes. Then Patel's voice cut through the chaos. Hey guys, remember that bug we found in Space Conqueror's VII? The one with the gravity wells. Oh no, Blake's laughter filled the command channel. You wouldn't. Already doing it. Patel had identified a quirk in the simulation's gravitational calculations. By precisely timing weapon discharges near stellar bodies, he created ripple effects that played havoc with the carefully plotted courses of enemy ships. Xenix's perfect formations began to look like abstract art. This is impossible, Xenix screeched across all frequencies. Admiral, they're exploiting simulation errors. Actually, I reviewed the code scrolling past. Everything they're doing is technically within parameters. The simulation allows for creative use of physics. Rodriguez's next move had half our technical staff questioning their career choices. He'd taken his fragment of the fleet and split it into the smallest possible units, creating what he called a bullet hell pattern that overwhelmed targeting systems. Stop dodging and fight properly, Xenix demanded. Can't hit what you can't catch, Rodriguez sang back, his swarm of ships performing maneuvers that made several observers nauseous. Nova, how's that thing coming? Blake's thing turned out to be a complete reinvention of supply chain logistics. She'd calculated that it was faster to let border outposts be destroyed and rebuilt than defended, creating a constantly shifting network of temporary fortifications that drove Xenix's prediction algorithms insane. The resources spent on reconstruction, Professor Nax moaned, are less than maintaining static defenses, Blake finished. Also, Raj, I'm sending you some ships to crash into that sun. Finally, Patel's glee was disturbing. Watch this, everyone. What followed was either brilliant strategy or criminal insanity. Patel used the destroyed ship's mass to minutely alter the sun's gravitational field, creating a cascading effect that disrupted the carefully planned supply lines of 3 different enemy fleets. That's not. You can't. Xenix was losing his composure. Admiral, surely this violates some regulation. I checked the rulebooks. There's nothing specifically forbidding the strategic destruction of stellar bodies for tactical advantage, mainly because no one had ever thought we'd need such a rule. By the 1-hour mark, the simulation looked less like a war game and more like a chaotic dance party. The humans had abandoned traditional fleet cohesion entirely, operating what they called a swarm of angry wasps doctrine. Ships zoomed around in patterns that seemed random but somehow always ended up exactly where they needed to be. Current casualty rates are excessive, my assistant noted. Can't lose ships if we already crashed them, Rodriguez declared proudly. The scary part was, he had a point. Their unconventional tactics had turned the simulation's entire resource management system on its head. Then Blake unleashed what she called her pro-gamer move. Hey Xenix, she broadcast, ever heard of spawn camping? She had identified the algorithms controlling enemy ship production and positioned microfleets near every major shipyard in Xenix's territory. The moment a new ship appeared, it was destroyed. The perfect organizational structure of the Arxian fleet began to crumble. This isn't how war works, Xenix howled. War never changes, Patel intoned seriously, then burst out laughing. But tactics do. Speaking of which, who wants to see what happens when you create a feedback loop in a neutron star's magnetic field? I watched in horror as decades of military doctrine were shredded by what the humans called speedrunning strats. They weren't trying to win the war in any conventional sense. They were breaking the very concept of how war should work. Time check, Rodriguez called out cheerfully. Coming up on 50 minutes. Think we can wrap this up before lunch? Looking at the chaos unfolding on my screens, at the bewildered faces of my fellow instructors, at the simulation's increasingly confused attempts to predict human behavior, I realized something terrifying. They just might do it. Nova, Rodriguez's voice had that dangerous gleam again. Remember that trick we used in the Academy finals? The one they specifically banned afterward. Oh yes, Blake and Patel replied in unison. I reached for my emergency stimulant patches. Something told me I was going to need them. The first hint that something was fundamentally wrong came when my neural interface started playing something called the final countdown. The humans had somehow hacked the simulation's audio systems. Admiral, my assistant's voice cracked. They're about to attempt something big. On screen, the 3 human fleets were converging on a point in empty space. Not a strategic location, not a valuable resource, just empty space. Nothing's there, Professor Nax sneered. They've finally lost their minds. Oh, something's there, all right. Patel's voice had that dangerous edge of someone who'd found a secret they weren't supposed to know. Want to know what we figured out about your simulation? I felt my mandibles go slack as understanding dawned. The boundaries. Bingo, Rodriguez crowed. Every simulation has them, even ones that model entire galaxies. There's always an edge to the map. Blake's fleet began a complex series of maneuvers that shouldn't have been possible with normal physics. And where there's a boundary, there's code, Patel finished. Code that has to handle what happens when something hits it. That's when I saw it. the fatal flaw in our perfect military simulation. We'd programmed it to handle every possible strategy, every conceivable tactic, but we'd programmed it from a distinctly alien perspective. We'd assumed certain rules were universal, certain limitations self-evident. "They're not trying to win the war," I whispered in horror. "They're trying to crash the system itself." Technically, Blake chimed in, "We're trying to win by crashing the system." Big difference. The simulation's boundaries weren't just arbitrary limits, they were part of its fundamental logic. The humans had realized that the processing, power-handling boundary interactions could be overwhelmed if you threw enough chaos at it. Sir, my assistant pointed at the readouts. The quantum processors. They're approaching critical load. On every screen, human ships were executing what they called wall clips and boundary exploits, terms that made my military training cry in despair. They'd turned the simulation's own physics against itself, creating paradoxes that forced the system to waste processing power resolving impossible scenarios. But the tactical algorithms, Professor Nax was clutching his datapad like a lifeline. The strategic matrices are predictable, I finished, finally understanding. We designed them to respond to logical, disciplined attacks, to counter strategies that make sense. Xenix's perfect formations were falling apart as the humans' chaos spread across the simulation. The Arxian cadet was screaming about proper military protocols, while Rodriguez's ships performed maneuvers that violated not just military doctrine but several laws of physics. "Think about it," Blake's voice was almost gentle. "You created a simulation that rewards careful planning, perfect execution, and rigid adherence to proven tactics. So naturally." "We did none of that," Patel laughed. "Why play by the rules when you can break them?" The quantum processors were now emitting a high-pitched whine that probably violated safety regulations. The humans had turned warfare into a game, but not the elegant strategic game we'd designed. They'd turned it into what they called a speedrun, looking for exploits and weaknesses in the system itself. 57 minutes, Rodriguez announced cheerfully. "New record." "This isn't a game," Xenix screamed. "This is serious military training." "Everything's a game if you know how to play it," Blake responded. "And look, we just won." The simulation's boundaries were visibly glitching now, reality fraying at the edges as human ships pushed against the limits of what we'd thought possible. They weren't just thinking outside the box, they'd found the box's source code and were rewriting it through sheer audacity. "Admiral," my assistant whispered, "should we shut it down?" I shook my head, watching in fascination as decades of military doctrine crumbled before human chaos theory. "No, let them finish it. We need to see this." "Final countdown," Patel whooped. "Everyone remember their positions." "Like we practiced," Rodriguez confirmed. "On my mark." I realized then what we'd actually created, not a simulation of war, but a test of conformity. And humans, blessed and cursed with their Deathworld creativity, had just blown conformity out of the galaxy. 3, 2, 1. The simulation didn't just end. It surrendered. The simulation's final moments were a symphony of chaos. The humans had positioned their fleets in what Rodriguez called a triangle of doom, creating feedback loops in the boundary code that cascaded through the entire system. Hitting maximum processing load in 3, 2. Patel's voice was drowned out by warning klaxons. "All ships, execute Operation Alt F4, Rodriguez commanded, using some ancient human gaming reference that made his companions laugh. Every screen in the observation deck exploded with light as thousands of human ships simultaneously executed physically impossible maneuvers. They weren't just breaking the rules of warfare, they were shattering the fundamental assumptions our entire military doctrine was built upon. 58 minutes, 17 seconds, Blake called out. Could have been faster if Raj hadn't stopped to blow up that neutron star. Worth it, Patel declared as his section of ships created what he called a physics fountain using gravitational anomalies like some demented juggler. The other species' reactions were priceless. A Volden observer's psychic shock caused every plant in the facility to simultaneously bloom. 3 mechanoid students had to be rebooted after their logic circuits crashed, trying to understand human battle tactics. A cephalon instructor tied himself into a literal knot. That's not possible, Xenix kept repeating, all 7 eyes twitching as his perfect battle formations dissolved into chaos. Wars aren't won like this. They can't be won like this. The simulation's victory conditions required either total military dominance or successful diplomatic resolution of the conflict. The humans had found a third option: break the system so thoroughly that it couldn't help but declare them the winners. Look at that processing spike, Patel cackled. The simulation can't handle this many paradoxes at once. He was right. The quantum processors were trying to resolve thousands of impossible scenarios simultaneously, ships that were somehow in multiple places at once, physics-defying maneuvers that created endless calculation loops, battle formations that looked less like military tactics and more like abstract art. And for our grand finale, Rodriguez's grin was audible. All 3 human fleets converged on a single point, their ships moving in patterns that made my tactical training scream in protest. The simulation tried to calculate the outcome, failed, tried again, and victory klaxons blared. Time elapsed 58 minutes, 42 seconds. Simulation status complete. For winner human squadron. Number of regulation violations error integer overflow. Speed run strats for the win. Rodriguez whooped as the neural interfaces disconnected. Looking at the stunned faces around me, I realized we'd just witnessed something more than a broken simulation. We'd seen the future of warfare itself, chaotic, unpredictable, and thoroughly human. And somewhere in the faculty lounge, Professor Nax was probably having a breakdown over his lost betting pool. I paused, watching the maintenance crews trying to repair the smoking quantum processors. Below, Rodriguez, Blake, and Patel were teaching a group of fascinated alien cadets something called speedrunning basics. The galaxy would never be the same. The board has officially ruled that the human victory stands, though with an asterisk noting profound concerns about their methods. They've also approved an unprecedented change to our curriculum, a new course called Unconventional Tactical Thinking to be taught by, well, you can guess who. Through the observation window, I could see Xenix Prime reluctantly accepting a gamer fuel beverage from Patel. The Arxian took a sip and immediately turned 3 new colors, but he was smiling. Personal notation: I've come to realize that perhaps perfect order isn't always the answer. The humans didn't just break our simulation, they broke our understanding of what's possible. The betting pools are in chaos, half the faculty needs therapy. And I've never been more excited about the future of military education. Final thought, I added, watching Nova Blake demonstrate proper spawn camping techniques to a bewildered but intrigued group of mechanoids. Next year's simulation will need a complete redesign. But somehow, I suspect the humans will just find new ways to break it. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what we need. End log. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to learn what a pro gamer move is. Admiral Krolax, out.